What's up, guys? It's Boondocks, and I'm back to finish my top 5 Warframes for the Plains of Eidolon list. And I wanted to go into a little bit, and by a little bit I mean a lot more depth for the last two to better justify my reasoning and really explain why they did take my top 2 spots. Now, to be fair, my number 1 beats my number 2 purely because of the fun scale in my opinion, whereas number 2 is actually more overpowered, as I believe it. But number 1 is just so much fun to play. She definitely won it. Since there's no reason to waste time, let's jump into it. Number 2, Octavia. So Octavia is one of, if not the best Warframe in the entire game. Her kit is so ridiculously overloaded that other frames can't even begin to match it. In fact, let's kind of give it a quick rundown step by step before I actually talk about why I like her out on the plains. Her passive is essentially Energy Siphon. Every time you cast it, or cast any ability, you and any teammates within 15 meters gain Inspiration. Inspiration will return 1 energy per second for 30 seconds, and casting another ability refreshes the buff. This is a ridiculous boost to pretty much anything that you're going to be doing during the game, because it means that you're actually able to forego using efficiency and still be able to regen enough energy to compensate for that. Then her Mallet and Resonator, her 1 and 2 abilities, actually synergize very well. And if you look, their durations actually are the same as far as lining up with each other. So basically what you do is you toss out her Mallet, which will attract enemy fire. Every time the Mallet takes damage, it's going to cause a pulse equal to the beat for your Mallet, your drums. It's going to pulse and reflect that damage back out with a 3.4 times multiplier to all the enemies within its radius. And again, this is radius, which means that the diameter is double that, so 36 diameter with my current setup. And it's going to be lasting 47 seconds, so you're going to be able to, because this damage constantly scales, the higher difficulty the enemies are, the more damage that your Mallet's actually going to put out. It's ridiculous. And because it attracts the damage from your enemies, it actually counts as a form of CC. Combine that with the Resonator, which will charm enemies almost like a Pied Piper to follow it around and keep shooting at the Mallet that the Resonator will go and pick up. Because that's exactly what it does. The Resonator will roll over, pick up the Mallet, and drive it around. The Resonator also does pulse for some damage, but it's relatively minor and more or less pointless. So I would generally just ignore that altogether. Let's move directly on to our last ability, Amp, because this one is, in all honesty, a little less interactive and a little bit harder to see what it's actually doing. Basically, within its given radius, it's just going to give you and your entire teammate a ridiculous buff. And as you can see, the radius is pretty big and the duration lasts forever. And with its base version, it's going to have a 2 times multiplier with the sound level up all the way, and only a 0.25 multiplier when it's still pretty quiet. To increase the sound, use loud weapons, Mallet, and Resonator to boost it up as much as possible, as well as Metronome. Because the duration of this ability is so ridiculously high, you don't actually need to worry about your efficiency once again. That's one of the nice things about having Octavia. Her abilities last so long, and you don't really want to keep spamming them like some other frames, you don't really have to worry about efficiency. Combine that with her passive and you're good to go. Finally, let's talk about Metronome. This ability is nuts. Metronome is where Octavia's kit really becomes overloaded, and this is why she is as powerful as she is. And for starters, let's turn off all the mod stat buffs so that way we can just talk about this flat out. So, as you can see, it has an initial radius, and this is where those pulses are coming out from the outside, collapsing in on Octavia, and if you perform a certain action, whenever that pulse gets to Octavia, you gain a stack, and once your stack reaches 100%, you gain a buff. That's where we're going to see the buff duration at 15 seconds. The top duration, this is how long your metronome is going to stay on for before you have to recast it, and you're also going to just gain a % increase to armor for you and all your teammates within range. Already it's kind of ridiculous. Now, what are some of the buffs you can get? Well, if you jump to the beat, you're going to gain a speed buff, starting at 30% increased speed. If you shoot to the beat, you're going to gain a 0.3 times multi-shot multiplier, so 30% more multi-shot. And if you melee attack to the beat, you're going to gain a 30% damage increase to melee attacks. Now the last one's not on here, and it's probably the craziest. As you can see right here, crouching on the beat grants a Cloak of the Nocturne buff. Yeah, so you can pretty much get the old Shadow Step passive built back into Octavia. And we all remember how ridiculous the Shadow Step passive was. And if you don't, they changed all of Naramon purely to get rid of that ability. So because of that, this is where Octavia gains all of her power, and it's why she is as devastating as she is. Let me pop these stats back on. Just take a look. Almost 22 meters, 47.2 seconds, increasing my armor by almost 50%. My buffs last for 35 seconds, and I get ridiculous speed and damage buffs whenever I do proc them, and because of the way I have my build set up, I'm almost always going to be getting these buffs. It looks ridiculous. Just wait till you see the top of my bar. So, why is Octavia so good out on the plains? Well, for starters, the fact that unlike most frames, you can straight up ignore efficiency, and this allows you to maximize in different ways, such as duration or range, things that you typically would have to sacrifice. And since the range out on the plains is so ridiculously high, now you can increase it to match. Combine that with the fact that her AoE damage and AoE CC are both built into the same abilities, and then actively search out nearby enemies, you have a tremendous frame. And this is before we even start talking about the team-wide buffing. So first we have the Amp ability, which is just in a given area, you're going to increase you and your entire team's damage to ridiculous levels. And since most of the planes of Eidolon, when you're doing bounties and missions, you're typically having to defend an area, you can cover that entire area with your Amp. Meanwhile, your Roller can be going around, your Resonator, aka Roller, can be carrying your Mallet around and just killing enemies left and right. Meanwhile, don't forget about your Metronome. You turn that sucker on with the constant pacing, which I'm going to show a little bit later in my mana chord section, exactly how to build that, and then you're going to just be able to spam these abilities and just constantly have up stealth, multi-shot, increased melee damage, increased speed. It's ridiculous. Just stay on the move, keep just naturally playing the game, and you're going to get all the buffs. It's ridiculous how overpowered it truly is. Finally, the real only downside to this is Metronome itself. Even when you make Metronome completely black, you're still going to see a little flash of light whenever you pull off and get one of its stacks leading up to actually gaining the buff. And because of this, it can actually be kind of annoying. Typically, you can wind up zoning out and just not really paying attention to it, but if you're having an issue, you might want to look elsewhere. When Planes of Eidolon first came out, I primarily just focused on using Octavia and nothing else until I learned what to do from mission to mission and being able to move from area to area. Now, typically, I play her as a melee frame, so that way I gain both the Shadow Step, aka Nocturne buff, and then get in with the melee buff, and you can start doing crazy amounts of AoE damage, especially if you have a good sweeping melee weapon, such as an Atarax or a... wow, why the heck can't I think of it? One of the bows, one of the pole arms. And you'll just be able to slag absolutely everything near you. The bigger the weapon, the more powerful it will be. So I definitely recommend, or faster, you want the range, is what I'm really getting at, so that way you can just tear through enemies very quickly. So things like the Galentine. Anyway, moving on. She's just so fun to play. The only downside is her abilities are, while being ridiculously overpowered, they're not necessarily flashy. So you're not going to see, say, Banshee or Ember or my number one character on my list. You're not going to see their killing potential just wiping out everything, but you're slowly going to see it tick up. So now I'm just going to jump to the end of my current recording mission here and just show you my kill count compared to the teammates. And I had some very good teammates. You might have noticed the Nova running around with the max duration, crazy range, and pretty good power strength build that I was running myself. And whenever you kill a single enemy, it just has a chain reaction killing everything else. It's kind of fun and cool to watch. So she was keeping up pretty close to me, but I still won out. So let's take a quick look at that, and we'll move on to the next part of the conversation. When it comes to actually building Octavia, you can pretty much build for anything you want. But there's primarily two things that most people agree that you want to focus on: duration and range. Now, the reason why power strength isn't as important is because you're still going to be gaining pretty much all the benefits that you're really looking for as far as stealth is concerned, with having without having the power strength, and the fact that her mallet and roller or resonator actually will continue to scale ridiculously well. Even without having that much power strength, you can actually forego it, and by increasing your range, you'll actually be drawing in more enemy fire as well as hitting more enemies with those mallet pulses. So what I would definitely recommend is going with a build. This is my personal build. I should start by saying that. This is my personal build for out on the plains, where I don't want to be casting all that often, which means I don't have to focus as much as I need to on efficiency, though I do still have a streamline built in there just because it is very helpful. Then my range is only 181 with a 136 power strength. This is where I get those stats that you're seeing before. Now, some of the things that you could do, if you are having issues with your energy, for instance, if you don't have Xeneric, feel free to swap out a Corrosive Projection for an Energy Siphon, or a couple other ways of getting around that as well. Other things that you could do is boost your range a little bit more by using something like Augur's Reach instead of Vitality. And likewise, you can do that with Cunning Drift as well, tossing that on if you want the slightly increased slide, which can be fun out in the plains. But obviously, with the release of Augur's Reach, it's much more efficient. However, this is a little bit harder to get at this point, though they have made it easier with the constant farming ability. With that being said, here's the alternate build. As you can see, it's not going to have nearly as much duration, but it doesn't matter as much because now at 100% efficiency, you're not going to be overpaying for your abilities. However, I am losing a considerable amount of power strength, but my range is maximum. So, just like Broly, I guess. Power maximum. Stupid joke, sorry. So, Cunning Drift, Overextended, Augur's Reach, and Stretch, all to push that sucker up as high as possible. Again, if you do want to boost your duration a little bit, feel free to drop something like the Vitality for another Constitution. Toss that on if you have the spot for it. I obviously don't, though technically I could do this, bump them around. And now, again, I am weaker for taking the damage, but overall, much higher duration and range. Let's take a quick look at those stats, shall we? And boom. There we go. As you can see, the radius didn't jump up nearly as much as you might think, per se. The duration didn't take nearly as much of a hit as you might think, and neither did all of your buffs. So overall, her abilities scale stronger off of the actions in-game and less about your mods, as odd as that is. So think of that as you will. I recommend the first build that I showed you, however. Onto the Manticore itself. So, with regards to actually using my Manticore in the game, well, I typically like to go for a silent one, and let me show this to you real quick. If you didn't know, in order to access your Manticore on Octavia, it's under your appearance, the Manticore tab. And as you can tell, I typically like to run my Manticore with constant beats in all categories. I do silence it just because when you're out on the plains, you're going to be out there for a while, and it's going to get kind of annoying after a while. So typically I silence them, but as you can tell, once I turn the volume up on these, the song's not all that bad, all things considered. So that's my primary song that I use. I, of course, do have other songs that follow actual things. Seven Nation Army being a major go-to, and then we have others, Mortal Kombat, Megalovania, Slipknot, Wait and Bleed, and then like Smooth Criminal, Michael Jackson. Sail. I always like this one, but as you can see, the beats are a little bit harder to actually land because you're not spamming constantly. This is why I stick with that first song that I showed, because there is a note at every single point. You're guaranteed to always get the outcome that you're looking for as long as you constantly keep spamming it. So holy crap, did I talk about Octavia for a very, very long time. And in all honesty, I think I'm going to talk about number 1 for almost as long. So with that in mind, I think I'm actually going to make a part 3 to this video series and talk about my number 1 spot in a totally separate video. So until then guys, like, comment, and subscribe. Good luck, have fun, and peace.